They called a name everyone expected to hear. But the silence that followed wasn't an oversight. It was an intentional, deliberate exclusion. On a sprawling tarmac, with the low sun glinting off the polished metal of a colossal aircraft, the ceremony was about to begin. The air was crisp, charged with the quiet tension of an impending departure. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen stood in rigid formation, their uniforms a sea of dark green and navy blue. A high-ranking officer, his face set and grim, held a clipboard. He called out names, a final roll call before a critical mission. Each name was met with a crisp, unified, "Here, sir," and a sharp salute. But then he called a name, and nothing happened. Not a rustle, not a reply. Just the heavy silence of 100 pairs of eyes. They looked at a woman who stood alone, slightly apart from the others, her face a mask of quiet resolve. Her name had been on that list, they all knew it. She was the one they had skipped. The name was Commander Lena Petrova, and the man who had deliberately bypassed her, Captain Thomas Vance, had a history of subtle hostility toward her. He'd never confronted her directly, but his disdain was a constant cold presence. She felt it like a chill on her skin. She felt the eyes of her comrades upon her. Some were sympathetic, a few looked away, complicit in their silence. They knew the rules. Rules that said a commander was to be treated with respect, and that a mission wouldn't move without all its key personnel. Yet here she was, standing on the edge of a great metal bird, her name uncalled, her presence ignored. They were trying to erase her, not just from the mission, but from their shared history. Lena's history, however, was not so easily erased. It was etched into the lines around her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture. Years ago, in the searing heat of a desert, a young Sergeant Petrova had faced down an impossible situation. Her unit had been pinned down by a relentless assault. A sandstorm raged, thick and blinding, and the air was alive with the sound of gunfire. Her CO, a man she deeply respected, went down in a hail of fire. Lena, then just a medic, made a decision that would define her life. Ignoring her own wounds, she crawled through the blinding grit, dodging enemy fire to get to him. The dust tasted like iron and grit. The screams of her comrades were a desperate symphony of pain and fear. When she reached him, he was barely breathing, but her hands, steady and sure, found the source of the bleeding. She worked under a storm of bullets, not with tools but with sheer will. He survived. She was wounded, but a hero. The medals she received were not just for her actions that day, but for the quiet, unyielding courage that had saved a life. She came home from that deployment with a new perspective and a deep, gnawing loss. The unit had lost more men than they could bear. The memories were not scars, but living wounds. The faces of the fallen appeared to her in quiet moments. The smell of dust and the metallic tang of blood came back in her dreams. She had to honor their memory, their sacrifice, and so she dedicated her life to a singular purpose: to never leave anyone behind. Never. The memory of her CO's last words to her, a faint whisper of gratitude, echoed in her mind. "Don't ever stop fighting for them, Petrova." That promise was her armor, her purpose. Now, on this tarmac, surrounded by people who were so ready to forget her, to move on without her, that promise was all she had. Lena stood still, a silent sentinel of dignity. She felt the eyes of the young soldiers, the ones who had never seen real combat. They saw a woman with a haunted past. They had heard the whispers, the rumors. A commander who didn't fit in, who preferred solitude to company. A ghost walking among them. But what they couldn't see, what they didn't understand, was that her silence was not weakness. It was a fortress. It was a reminder of every life she had saved and every one she had lost. The rules of this mission were simple. Every man and woman had to be accounted for. Captain Vance was breaking that rule. He was breaking a sacred trust. The world around them was still, expectant. The hum of the C-130 Hercules aircraft on the runway was the only sound breaking the silence. Captain Vance, with a satisfied, almost smug expression, put his clipboard down. "All personnel accounted for," he announced, his voice ringing with false authority. He turned to face the waiting crew, a signal for them to board. But no one moved. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He repeated his order, his voice a little sharper this time. "Let's go, people!" We have a schedule to keep." Still, the men and women of the crew stood still. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes were fixed on Commander Petrova. They had watched the entire exchange, and a silent, collective understanding had passed between them. They knew. They understood the moral injury that had just taken place. They knew that their mission was not just about logistics and schedules, but about honor. And without Lena, there was no honor. Vance's composure began to crack. He turned to a grizzled chief warrant officer standing nearby, his face a mask of frustration. "What's the meaning of this, Chief?" he hissed. The chief simply looked at him, his gaze unwavering, and then a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture, a slight dip of his chin toward Commander Petrova. "We don't move without all of us, Captain," he said, his voice low and firm. Just as the tension threatened to snap, a black sedan pulled up, silent and unannounced. The rear door opened, and out stepped a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Admiral Richard Hayes, a living legend, a man of quiet authority and unquestionable integrity. He walked with a slight limp, a reminder of a long-ago battle. His gaze swept over the scene, from the static crew to the fuming Captain Vance, and finally to the silent, dignified figure of Commander Petrova. A faint, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. They shared a history, a mutual respect forged not in a classroom, but in the crucible of war. "What is the status of this mission, Captain Vance?" the Admiral asked, his voice a low rumble. "Sir, we're ready for deployment," Vance replied, his voice a little shaky now. "All personnel are accounted for." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "Captain," he said, his voice a quiet storm, "I was told there was a final roll call. And I was told that a Commander Petrova, a critical member of this team, was skipped." The Admiral turned to face the entire crew, his voice rising just enough to carry to every ear. "In my service," he said, "we have two unshakable rules. The first is that you never leave a person behind. The second is that you never forget a person who saves a life." He paused, his gaze fixed on Captain Vance. "I suggest you check that list again, Captain, because we don't move without her." The silence that followed was deafening. Captain Vance, his face a pasty white, fumbled with his clipboard. The mission, the departure, the schedule, all of it felt utterly insignificant now. He cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly, and he looked at the name he had so callously ignored. "Commander Lena Petrova," he said, his voice barely a whisper. 1,000 pairs of eyes turned to Lena. She stood straight, her chin up, a quiet defiance in her posture. "Here, sir," she said, her voice clear and strong. The words were not just a response, they were a triumph. The crew, in a spontaneous and silent act of solidarity, straightened their uniforms, their backs rigid with a sense of restored honor. Lena walked past the ranks, her head held high. No one spoke, but in their silent salutes, in the respect in their eyes, she felt their support, a wave of silent validation. It was a beautiful, powerful moment of moral justice. The captain's public humiliation was not a punishment, but a consequence of his own actions. The Admiral had not needed to shout or command. He had simply restated the core values of their service, and in doing so, he had righted a profound wrong. The C-130 roared to life, its engines a thunderous chorus of power. As Lena boarded the aircraft, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey wasn't just about a mission now. It was about something far more important: honor, sacrifice, and the silent strength of those who carry the heaviest burdens. She was a silent hero, not because of the medals on her chest, but because of the battles fought in the quiet chambers of the heart. Her story was a reminder that true power isn't in a title or a command, but in the unwavering commitment to human decency. It was a testament to the quiet truth that some names are etched not on a list, but on the very soul of a people, and that some battles are won not with a sword, but with dignity. Where do you think these silent heroes are found in our daily lives? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that honor the true meaning of courage and sacrifice.